So we can do the definition of natural selection, but what you need to know is that this is actually the mechanism of evolution. So we've described evolution. It's change over many generations. But how it happens, that's what mechanism means. How it happens is natural selection. And this is the idea of one Mr. Charles Darwin, and we'll talk more about him later. There are 4 big assumptions that work into natural selection. So let's examine those one by one. Okay, so all populations do have natural variation. You've seen some of it. You've seen variation in height and hand span and foot length and pinky length and all kinds of weird things. We could look at variation in eye color or hair color. We could look at variation in color vision. We could look at variation in really subtle, weird things that are hard to measure. But it's easier to keep it to things that are easier to measure. We could look at variation in a population of coyotes. That's a good one. We should talk about coyotes this year. I love hearing coyotes at night. I don't love it when they're near chickens, but I do love hearing them. So all populations have some amount of variation. We're all different. Maple trees, oak trees, dandelions have some inherent amount of variation. What does inherent mean? Just sort of inborn, fundamental to them. Inherent variation. Okay, so everybody's different. And the second one is that the environment presents challenges to survival and reproduction. We could sum that up in 3 words. Life is tough. We could probably sum that other one up in 3 words too. Everything what would be a better word? Unique, different. Maybe we need to use 4 words. Slightly different. Everything is slightly different. And 2, life is tough. Now, as tough as any of our lives may be at any given moment, for humans living in Ohio in the early part of the 21st century, how many of you have been stalked by a large carnivore on your way to or from school, such as a mountain lion, a hungry black bear, a grizzly? Okay. Did it leave any marks? I mean stalked. I mean like there was a mountain lion that was creeping along behind you and you had to somehow escape from it before it could kill and eat you.
Like kind of coyote.
Chasing you? Ready to eat you? Okay, no, not the same. And coyotes, actually, there are no documented, well, there's one now in Maine. No, they're not wolves. Not the same thing. Not different.
And wolves.
You've had wolves coming at you?
In the woods that came out, yes.
Not in Ohio, you didn't. We don't have any wild wolf populations.
There was a wolf.
I'd want to see evidence of that. Gesundheit. We do have very large coyotes. However, the eastern coyote is a pretty big canid. We don't typically get stalked by things that are looking to kill us and eat us. So life is not that level of tough. How many of you have had to go out and forage, and by forage I mean dig around in the woods, look under rocks, look under logs, pick, harvest, or kill every single thing you've eaten in the last month? You were able to go to a refrigerator or a store or somebody made you something? Okay. The level of life is tough that we're talking about is really down to being killed and eaten and starving to death. So, life is tough. It's less tough for modern humans than it has been for most of our history, which is nice. I rather enjoy the fact that I can walk out in my backyard and there is no large carnivore that's going to come at me. When you read accounts from the frontier of people, Ohio in 1803, well, Ohio in 1790, had mountain lions. Ohio in 1790 had wolves. Ohio in 1790 had big active populations of black bears. Ohio in 1790 had a lot of things that would kill you and eat you. And that happened to people. So life is tough. There are challenges. We're not so concerned with being chased and killed and eaten. We're more concerned with other things. But for a lot of species, getting killed, getting eaten is still a big concern. Okay, point 3. Individuals tend to produce more offspring than will survive. So how would we sum that up in 3 words? How many of you have seen a dandelion gone to seed? Can you envision that little dandelion? What do each one of those little parachute things represent? An offspring. They represent a potential new... Lots. Die. Young. So everything is slightly different. Life is tough. Lots die young. Lots of organisms never make it to maturity. Remember me telling you about my fish stocking days? I used to squeeze fish for eggs and sperm. It was delightful. My friends had lots of fun making jokes at my expense. I came home smelling like walleye snot every day. It was great. Actually, it was a lot of fun. We also stocked those baby fish, and they were about this long when they went into Mosquito Lake. And they were less than an inch long. They were called 2 eyes and a wiggle at that stage. They weren't even fry. We would have a box that was about 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot with a plastic bag inside it, full. I mean, the water looked black, full of little, 3/4 of an inch walleye. And we'd run a siphon hose out of that box down into the lake, and those walleye must have had one heck of a ride, because 1 minute they're swimming around in this box with all their buddies, and the next minute, and deposited down, and we would try to get that tube down as far into the lake as we could, like a good 4 feet if possible. There might have been 100,000 fish in each box. How many of them do you think actually made it to be something that you could catch and clean? Maybe 100? I mean, the odds are not good when you're a walleye this long. The odds are very not good. Everything in the world wants to eat you because you are little and tiny and defenseless and delicious and full of calories. And everything needs calories because life is tough. So there tend to be a whole lot more offspring than make it to adulthood. Of those 100,000 walleye in a box, maybe 100 make it to, maybe 1,000 make it to be this long. And maybe 1,000 of them make it to be 6 inches long. They're not reproductive at that point. They can't reproduce until they're much bigger than that. Maybe 100, maybe 10 make it to the point where they're actually going to reproduce. Lots die young. Now, this is, by and large, not the case for humans anymore. We've kind of rigged the world in our favor. And for the most part, in the developed world, so in the US, in Canada, in industrial parts of South America, in most of Europe, in much of China, in much of Asia, if someone has 2 or 3 children, they expect that those children will live. That was not always the case. If you go back in your own family history, my great-grandfather was one of 17 children born, and I think 11 of them survived to adulthood, and that was not uncommon. People were very accustomed to burying their children. And if you read through, because we have a lot of genealogy stuff that I've been working on, and if you read through that record, you know, a lot of these kids died, like there was a pair of twins who died when they were 10 months and 13 months old. You know, small children got sick, they died. So it's not so much the case for humans today, but it has been at some points in our history. 10,000 years ago, it was certainly the case that people had far more children than they expected to raise to adulthood. But lots die young. Okay, the fourth. Individuals with mutations or features that have some advantage for survival tend to pass on more of their genes. Individuals with mutations or features that have some advantage for survival tend to pass on more of their genes. So what's a mutation? What is it, Logan? Were you just stretching, or do you remember what a mutation is? All of us are mutants, yes. But what's a mutation? No, every living thing other than single-celled organisms are mutants. But what a mutant is something that has a mutation. What's a mutation? A change in a gene. A change in a chunk of DNA that controls how you look or function. So an individual that has some change in a gene that controls how they look or function, or has some feature, whatever variation they have, it happens to work. It happens to be advantageous. It happens to give them an edge. They tend to pass on more of their genes. How do you pass on more of your genes?
Have kids.
Have kids. Have lots of kids. Have as many kids as you possibly can. I'm not giving you this advice. This is just an evolutionary strategy. So think about rabbits. How many of you have seen a nest of baby bunnies? How many of you have seen a nest of baby bunnies up close in the spring with a lawnmower? I hate that. Or had a barn cat. I had a barn cat years ago who was, we called her the ferocious hunter, and she would clean out an entire nest of baby bunnies in an afternoon. She would bring them in one at a time, one bloody baby bunny at a time. Sometimes she got the mom too. She was vicious. We didn't have any mice. But, you know, lots of babies. Rabbits can have litters of up to 15 kits. Rabbits can have their first litter when they're 60, they can get pregnant when they're 60 days old. They can have another litter of kits, 3 weeks after giving birth to their last litter? That's a lot of rabbits. When they say breeding like bunnies, they mean it. Who here has had mice at home? Has anybody here raised mice? Okay. You raise them for snake food, or? Oh, okay, in the house. Who here has raised mice like in a tank? Has anybody ever had a mouse accident? Hey, folks. Why are you packing stuff up? So, if you end up with a male and a female mouse in the same tank, guess what happens? Oh, they're going to have babies. And I think their gestation period's like 3 weeks. And then she can get pregnant again a week later. And all of her baby girls out of that first litter can get pregnant at like 4 weeks. And they will start breeding with all the boys in the tank. And I had a friend who had a population explosion. She ended up with several hundred mice. We will pick this up tomorrow.